Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Bowles. I'm delighted to be presenting today as part of the LGFA Research Pod series. The title of my presentation is Valuing the Journey as Much as the Destination, Collaboration and Reflection in Coaching. To give you some background, over the last 3 to 4 years, Dr. Anna Dwyer and I in Mary Immaculate College had been working on a broad research project. Today's presentation focuses on a narrow part of that where we look at our learning as coaches. To give you an idea of what we did and why we did it, I need to give you some more background information. As I mentioned, we're both teacher educators in Mary Immaculate College, but we're also volunteer coaches with the college ladies football team. This started towards the end of the 2015-16 season. And just like many coaching arrangements, it happened quite informally, where Anne came in and assisted with some training sessions towards the end of that season. We continued on like this through the following season, where Anne attended all of the training sessions, but I was still responsible for planning and preparation. So designing the training sessions, communicating with players, and doing all of that preparation work. During some informal conversations that happened during that season, maybe at the end of a training session or on bus journeys back from away matches, we began thinking about our own coaching and asking questions like, are we doing this well? Can we improve? Are we being effective? What could we do better? The usual questions that coaches might ask each other. And we decided to start a formal research project to see could we come up with some of those answers. So at that point, around the start of the 2017-18 season, I had been coaching the team for about 12 years. Okay, so roughly since 2007 or thereabouts. I'd also some inter-county experience and had experience as a coach educator with the GAA firstly, and more recently with the LGFA. Anne, on the other hand, was just finishing up her playing career with Tipperary at the time, had some experience at underage coaching, but had very little experience coaching an adult team. I would consider myself quite experienced at this level, where Anne would consider herself to be inexperienced. And that's where we started. From our research interests in other areas, particularly related to our teacher education work in the college, we were both aware of the self-study approach. Self-study is widely used in education and teacher education, but not much in coaching. Self-study is a means to examine the self in practice. So for us, it gave us a way of looking at our own practice and helped us to provide a framework to see how we might improve. In terms of our coaching, I had been reading up a lot about athlete-centered coaching. So during the course of 2017-18, we began looking at ways to see could we be more athlete-centered in our coaching. So this presentation focuses on what we learned and how we learned during that time working together. We gathered a range of data. One of the key issues was reflective practice templates that we each filled out at the end of each week during the season. That amounted in total to around 80 written reflective practice documents. We had weekly discussions where we read through those documents and planned for the following week. We also worked with what we've called critical friends. Critical friends were people who were not involved in our coaching, but who met us regularly to discuss coaching issues with us. They also read our reflective practice diaries and pointed us in certain directions and probed us with certain questions. Over the course of the 2017-18 and 18-19 seasons, we worked with mostly 2 critical friends and had around 10 discussions with them. We also got feedback from players in the form of focus groups that were conducted by a separate research assistants to keep us away from that aspect of the data collection. So to give you some of the background literature that we looked at, so we're very conscious that, as Cushion, Armour and Jones mentioned, coaching is a very complex, interrelated and interdependent process. So coaches working together, coaches working with players, coaches working in different contexts. We need to take all those different interactions into account, because those interactions affect how we coach. They affect how we learn within that coaching environment. Coach learning then can take place in a number of ways. It can be formal, like formal certified courses that many of you will be familiar with in terms of the LGFA fundamentals or level 1 courses, or you may have done formal courses with other national governing bodies. Coaches also learn informally. So in going to seminars, going to workshops, events that are not part of a formal coach education process. Many questions have been asked about the effectiveness of formal coach education programs. And so a lot of attention is now being placed in research on informal learning. How do we learn informally to coach in other contexts? And a key part of that is how we might engage in critical reflection. Gilbert and Trudell, for example, have said that 10 years of coaching without reflection is simply 1 year of coaching repeated 10 times. And engaging in critical reflection is important for developing effective coaching practice. And that's why we made reflection an important part of our data collection within this project. So the next few diagrams build on what we have found, how we learned within that environment over the course of 2 years. So on the right-hand side, you can see the green writing and the three green balls, where reflection took place. We reviewed that reflection, and then we deliberated more deeply on it in our own conversations and with our critical friends. So in those conversations, the focus was very much on ourselves as coaches. What we were finding difficult, were we struggling with things, how we were learning, were we able to improve? The other layer then, the planning and action part, focused very much on our coaching practices. What drills or games or activities we were planning, why we were doing particular things, and again, looking at were they being effective, and if they weren't, how are we changing them? So that cycle, that reflection, review, deliberation, plan, and action became the important outputs of our research. I'll go into those in a little bit more detail over the next slides. Because we've also to add in the impact of our critical friends. So people who came in from the outside who didn't see us coaching, but were able to ask us important questions about our coaching practices. I'll come back to critical friendship in a few minutes, but I want to look at our learning over time. What do we now consider that we have learned? Well, first of all, collaborative planning was very important. So by planning our sessions together, we were both very aware of how we came up with the objectives for a particular training session, what we were trying to achieve, and then how we would achieve that. Reflection became a really important part of what we did as well. So the initial writing piece, where we wrote structured reflections each week, then the reading part where we each read each other's reflections, and then thirdly, the dialogue that took place. So the conversations that happened based on what we had written. That was fundamental to the way we learned as coaches during those 2 years. There was a significant change in the way we coached. As I mentioned at the very start, Anne would have helped out with some of the sessions, but was not involved in the planning. By the end of this process, we were both coaching together. We were co-coaching each session. We both had equal responsibility in how the session was carried out. I think this happened because of the clear reflection, planning, and review processes that we embedded into our practice. And then the role of critical friendship. Internally, as Anne and I helped each other and discussed our coaching asked for advice, gave some suggestions. That was very, very important. And then the external, the people who are outside our coaching bubble, who could give a detached view, were really helpful for us to work out problems within our coaching. So specifically, if you look at these three pillars, this is what we believe are the critical friends helped us with. So on the left-hand side, at a fundamental level, it began to ask us to problematize practice, or just posing scenarios for us, asking us about hypothetical situations and how we would deal with them, asking what we believed the most important parts of our session were, how we described our role in those training sessions. Those initial conversations helped us to look more deeply at what we were doing. What were we doing well? What did Anne do well, or what did I do well? What were we observing about each other? What advice we would give to each other? And thirdly, on the right-hand side, the final column, the critical friendship questions, discussions, and probing helped us to see where we had learned. It began to help us to look back at things we had done differently in our training sessions, and how we were doing things better as a coaching team. So how might this be of use to other coaches? I suppose fundamentally, I would say we do not have all the answers. I would say even that we probably now have more questions about our practice now than we did at the start. I think that's an important outcome of the whole learning process for us. We are learning, yes, but that brings up new questions for us, that we can still do things differently, we can change things, we can still improve our practice. And it's important to remember, as Robin Jones says, that learning that occurs is anything but sequential. Okay, there are so many factors at play that it is difficult to provide definite answers, but I would hope that this prompts you to question your own practice. In your own context, what might you do? So for example, some of our reflective practice prompts are evident on this slide. On the left-hand side from the 2017-18 season, and on the right-hand side from the 2018-19 season. So you might see some of these prompts might be useful for yourselves, but you might also see how they changed a little bit. In the second column, we began to focus much more on how we could help each other to learn as coaches. So we asked questions like, how can Anne or Richard help me in the next session? So we were seeking help. A problem I might have had with a particular activity, I was asking for some help on how to do that better. Okay, we're also looking at how we might give help to each other. And thirdly, we were looking at what we had learned from each other. So by doing things differently, by trying things in different ways, we were learning from each other as well as helping each other to learn. Okay, so that might translate into your practice or your context a number of ways. So I would suggest in whatever way you do it, make sure to build in reflection into your coaching. So you might use a formal model for reflection like Kolb or Gibbs, and those are easily searchable. You might use something like Plan, Do, Review, which is an integral part of the LGFA coach education process. Or you might use something like what Wade Gilbert talks about, preflection and reflection. So reflecting after the session, which then helps you to plan and preflect for your next coaching session. The second a piece of advice I would have would be to seek advice. Can you work with a mentor? Is there somebody you can bounce ideas off? Somebody who can act as a sounding board? Somebody that gives you a different perspective on your coaching? They may observe you, or they may just act as somebody who will be available to have a chat about your coaching practice. And finally, are there ways you can collaborate? From a personal point of view, I have found collaborating has been really motivating for me to improve my coach learning. Working with somebody has been more enjoyable and more fulfilling than just coaching on my own. So are there coaches in your own club that you might collaborate in some ways with to improve your coaching? Are there other coaches with the particular team you're involved in who you can work more closely with in planning in reflecting, in learning how you coach. So summing up, part of the whole self-study methodology is to discuss our findings, like in a forum like this, and then seek feedback from other sources. So if anybody has any questions on self-study in particular as a research approach, or more coach-specific around coach reflection or collaboration within a coaching team, I'd be very happy to take any feedback via email, or to answer any questions, or go into more detail in some of our experiences. So my email address is there, and Anne's is there as well, and my Twitter handle is also there. If anybody wants to get in touch for to continue this conversation. So finally, to wrap up, I'd like to thank the LGFA and Lynn Savage for giving us the opportunity to share our research, and I hope it has prompted you think about your own coaching practice as you implement different strategies within your own coaching. Thank you very much.